My name is Flavia, and I work for Southeast London Community Energy. We are a local community energy provider for schools and community buildings. And we also help households that are struggling with their energy bills, and we are now also helping homeowners who are curious about retrofitting their houses through our Future Fit Homes programs. We do this because we've got three principles. The one is local clean energy generation, the second is reducing energy usage, and the third is leaving no one behind. And I'm really excited for this next panel discussion because it kind of aligns very much with what sits at the heart of what Selce does, which is about how do we work as a community together for our individual and our mutual benefit. So without further ado, I'm going to start the discussion. We have four incredible panelists. I'm very excited. So the first is Nadia, who is our co-chair at Selce, and she. I'm going to read this just because I'll get run away with joy. Nadia led up the development of our first Future Fit Homes program, Selce's one-stop shop advice and service for homeowners looking to retrofit in its first iteration, and has now become the co-chair of the organization. She's also on the board of Community Energy London, advising on key issues to support the growth of the wider community energy sector. Now, Nadia works as an independent consultant with a range of community energy groups, supporting with project development and training in renewable energy and retrofit. Next to Nadia, welcome Nadia, thank you for being here. Yeah. Next to her, we have Keith Ison, who's of St. Alphege's Eco Church, and Keith is a member of St. Alphege's Church Greenwich. He's part of their 10-strong eco group who are tasked with helping the church to advance a wide agenda related to climate and environmental justice. He spent his career working as a scientist and manager in the NHS and has always been interested in climate issues. In his retirement, he enjoys Tai Chi, walking, and tending his allotment. Thank you for coming, Keith. And next to Nadia again, we have Harry. Harry is an architect and is the managing director of Raft. He's a passive house designer, and Raft stands for Retrofit Action for Tomorrow. He's the founding and director of Retrofit Action for Tomorrow, an architect-led multidisciplinary team with expertise in building estate retrofit, community engagement, and net zero carbon planning and action. He's won a lot of awards. You've won a lot of awards, which I won't read all your awards. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So thank you for coming, Harry. And then next to Harry, we have Madeleine Pauker, who's a PhD researcher in Science Policy Research Institute and Energy Demand Research Centre at the University of Sussex. And her research focuses on housing decarbonisation in the UK, specifically place-based approaches, which is quite a buzz term in community retrofit, which we'll go into a bit more. And she's under the supervision of I'm with three professors. And she's particularly interested in political economy of energy demand and reduction. So we've got a breadth of knowledge at our fingertips, at our ear tips. And so I'm going to jump in with the first question. We'll do the same as this morning. I'll ask them each some questions, and we'll open up to the floor. So I think the reason we wanted to do this panel is because housing is such an individualistic issue, but it is also making changes to a home is such a big deal in life. And there's so much knowledge. It's so complicated. Not all of us want to spend all of our time thinking about it, but if we come together, many brains make for more interesting solutions. So this is about understanding what people have done around retrofit in community settings so that we can then take those ideas forward in our local communities together. So my first question is for you, Nadia. So what is community energy? Why is retrofit of community energy buildings so important? And how can that be applied to homes and to streets?
Okay, so first question, what is community energy? You're going to have to remind me of all the questions, Flavia, because I have baby brain at the minute, so my memory is very poor. But community energy at the core of it really is just about people coming together to both have a say in how their energy system works and make it work for them, but also about creating a future that is greener and fairer for people usually in their local area. So there's hundreds of community energy groups popping up across the UK. I think we're at over 500 community energy groups now. And they all have varying different focuses, but it tends to be something around renewable energy generation, energy efficiency, and tackling fuel poverty. Those tend to be the three kind of key areas that community energy groups have traditionally focused on. But yeah, at its core, it's people coming together to try and create a more sustainable future for everyone in their area. And what was the second question, sorry? So why is retrofit of community buildings important? So we're sat here today in a community building. Thankfully, it's kind of nice and warm and cozy, and I'm feeling quite comfortable. I'm not feeling too hot, too cold. But I'm sure most of us have sat in a community building in the middle of the winter and been sat there shivering, very cold, and feeling uncomfortable. And equally in the summer, sat there in a community building feeling way too hot because the sun is beaming into those massive old windows, which are absolutely beautiful, but it's causing a lot of overheating and it's causing sweat, and let's not talk about what else is causing. It's important to retrofit these buildings because often these are the places where local people will get their first feel for what does it actually feel like to be in a retrofitted building, and be able to see it in action. So we've seen lots of community buildings across London that have done a lot of work on retrofit, and I'm sure Keith is going to talk more about what they've done at the church. But often these places not only retrofit for the improvement of the service users of the building, the community people that are using the building day in, day out, and often a lot of these people are kids. A lot of people who have disabilities are coming to utilize community centres, and a lot of people that could really benefit from that extra help are benefiting from retrofits at those places. So that's the first important reason. And I think the second important reason is community centres don't keep the secrets to themselves. They really share what they've done, and they share how they've done it, and they show other organisations and other individuals how to go down that route and what it looks like practically. So I think that's the second important reason for retrofitting community buildings. And yeah, how can this be applied to homes and streets? So community buildings really are a hub. We're all here today, and a lot of us live in Southeast London, and pretty much all of us live in London. I'm sure I've seen people that have trekked here from North London today, so well done for getting down here. But having a place to actually see what retrofit looks like, to feel what a difference it has made, is the first step in engaging people on what can sometimes be a complex, and we were just talking about earlier, insulation sometimes being quite a boring topic. I mean, I know if I talk to my mom about insulation, it's not the most exciting thing she wants to talk about. So I think it's that first step and first level of engagement. And often community buildings as well are kind of a step between commercial buildings and domestic buildings. So a lot of the practical solutions that we see implemented in community buildings are somewhere in between. I've seen churches, for example, that have implemented energy management systems that are meant to be used in a domestic setting, but work really well because the church is relatively small. So people aren't getting these experiences in commercial buildings, in offices, in warehouses, in places like that. And community buildings implementing those solutions means that people get to see practically, oh, what does this energy management app look like on my phone if I was to implement it in my house? So I think that's part of the reason that community buildings are so central to being the hubs to start this journey off for everyone else in their homes and streets.
Thank you. I think the other thing that's really interesting about it is about how there's that mutual support that also happens in community buildings. So there's something about what community buildings stand for in terms of their values. Like you said, they don't keep things to themselves, and those values that sit within community buildings are ones that make retrofit more human. It makes it much easier to engage with retrofit if it's not just about maybe like your walls, your doors, your windows. If it's about something a bit more. And so the next speaker that we have is Keith, who's St. Alphege's Eco Church is quite interesting in how and why you're approaching retrofit and what the barriers you're facing are, and how you're mobilizing the parish, for lack of a better word, through the principles that sit within that community building. So I guess, my question for you is how are you doing that, and what guides you to do that and gets people on board?
Shall I pick up Nadia's point first about what our problem is, if you like? So do you want to put the first slide up? The Church of England has got a target of net zero by 2030, which is, shall we say, optimistic. But it's a good target because it kind of holds our feet to the fire. And this is, at St. Alphege Church, we emit about 41 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent a year. And you can see 25 tons emission of gas, and the hall uses 10 tons emission of carbon dioxide for heating and space heating and hot water. And then for lighting and other stuff, it's much smaller, but it's still there. So we have a kind of big problem. It's several orders of magnitude bigger than the average house. Well, no, several times bigger than the average house. So what are we going to do about it? Well, the next slide shows we had an energy assessor come, so we'd encourage everyone to get an energy assessor in to look at their premises and what they're doing. And this guy was very helpful. So if we lump everything together, that's our kind of annual emission. If we were to start generating our own power by putting solar panels, that's the green bit at the bottom. So we'd only get a third of the way up the graph at all if you were allowed to do it by Greenwich Council. Because we're a Grade 1 listed building in a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the Council Conservation Area and Historic England have got their eye on us, as have the Greenwich Society. So we have to be kind of quite careful about what we do. And that's another thing for people to bear in mind, is the aesthetics of what you're doing. You have to take account of that and how the community will feel about what you do to a building that the community has a stake in. So we started with some small things. So the big bit at the top is heat pumps. Well, yes, putting in heat pumps in the church, a listed building, that could be quite difficult. So we probably have to put in a ground source heat pump, but then we might hit the DLR or the new power tunnel that they're putting in underneath us. So we've got to be a bit wary of that. But we can do things in the middle. So draft proofing we've already started. So a member of our congregation whipped up some draft excluders to go across our 3-foot 17th century, 18th century doors to kind of keep the draft out the bottom. And I put some commercial draft excluder around them. That will help. But our windows are from 1715, so they leak air like crazy, and it's a listed building, so we can't just kind of do anything to them. But we can do heating controls, you mentioned that, so that's another thing that we can pick up. Draft proofing, LED lights, we had the church refurbished recently, so we put LED lights everywhere, which is great, that saved a lot of energy. But you can see that it's still going to be a real struggle to kind of close that gap to net zero, and we can't make it at the moment. So we'd have to think what we do. But it's going to be hugely expensive. So although solar panels on the church roof, if we get planning permission, will probably only cost, I don't know, 150 grand. It's going to cost $250,000 to put the scaffolding up, to put them up. So you begin to have real big costs when you're talking about a huge building like ours. But to kind of move on to what is happening elsewhere, one of the good things about being part of the Church of England is that it's a community network. So we know there are churches doing all kinds of stuff. So St James's Piccadilly, King's College, Cambridge, York Minster all have solar panels on their roofs, and they're all Grade 1 listed buildings. So that kind of gives us food for thought. And there are lots of small things as well happening. So all the good stuff happens at a community level, about people working together to make things happen. That's another lesson that we can draw is don't try and do it on your own. Go and get advice and learn from other people. So St John's Waterloo is another good example of a building that's put in all sorts of stuff to kind of future-proof the building. And I think that the thing is about it comes back to what we're actually doing is not just addressing our building's needs, but also encouraging individual members in the congregation or around us to take their approach to net zero, biodiversity, climate change, climate justice seriously. And the Church of England is quite good because it's recommended. There's a charity called A Rocha UK which has a 5-step framework, a framework that gives you an idea of what issues you can address. And I've got some leaflets here with, if you want to find out more about that later, but there are 5 areas. And the first one in a church context is called worship and teaching, which in a secular context you might talk about keeping yourself informed, but also keeping yourself motivated. So it's about falling in love with nature, getting people to think about why we want to do something about the climate issue, why we want to address other people's problems around the world, these sort of ethical issues. So we've developed a link with a group in Malawi. Again, it's very small scale. They're planting trees because Malawi is quite deforested in some areas. So they plant not just trees for shade or trees for agriculture, they're also planting trees for fruit and for nuts so that it can create economic issues. And they've recently moved to try to help reduce the amount of firewood by developing a machine that will compress organic waste into briquettes, so you can kind of burn that instead. So this is, again, small scale, but lots of things going on. And the fact that we've got involved with this means that it makes us more aware of what it's like for other people across the world. And again, motivates us as individuals to do something both together and in our own lives. And teaching and stuff, because it is the ethics and morality of what we do. So that's the first thing about, get your head in the right place and get other people on board and motivated. Second thing is buildings and energy. So that's a big area for particularly retrofit. So I've talked a bit about that. The third area is land and nature, so biodiversity and the environment. It's not just enough to think about the buildings, it's also about thinking about your wider environment and the area around you. How do we care for that, and by extension across the world? How do we ensure things like deforestation don't carry on? Are we aware of our own impact on the environment? The fourth one is community and engagement. So again, I'm here because we decided we ought to get involved in stuff in the community, and hey, here we are, and it's being really valuable for us. I don't know about you, but we find it really good. So increasing our awareness both locally and globally, and that's again part of the target of this survey approach. And the last one is individual lifestyle, so encouraging members of your community, other people that you know, to change the way that they live. So that means making it a discipline to talk about what works, what you've done, and what other people can do, and to kind of challenge people's thinking in the nicest possible way, to make positive changes. And we've added a 6th one to our list, which is communication. So it's no good doing stuff if you don't talk about it and show other people what they can do and encourage them. And I've had some really good ideas today that I've heard people talk about that I think we can use as well. So thank you to all those of you who are contributing to today.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, I think there's something about the sharing of knowledge that's really important, and how we come together. I've been talking about this a lot. I'm going to talk about it forever. Is just that creating that shared knowledge, those peer networks, so that even though it's retrofit is one part, it's part of a much larger puzzle. Be it health, be it well-being, be it environment, what have you. But how we live well in a community together. And what I think is interesting is because I'm a communications person, is that communications piece. But Harry, you retrofitted your house to a passive house standard, and I've seen that when you were doing it, you opened up your doors quite a fair bit in order to share what you were doing with your neighbors or neighborhood. And since you've done that, you've worked more and more actively with Raft, your organization, to decarbonize schools. So I'm interested in how community sits in that, and how you engage with your local community, and what drives you around that, and what the mechanisms are that you use.
Probably a bit like Nadia. I'm going to make sure I answer all those questions. I just want to say that I'm the founder and managing director of Raft, but I have two amazing staff members here. There's Michelle, who's our engagement lead, and my co-director, Kate. So I just want to say they're here. Do talk to them as well. They're very, very experienced, and we are a team. So I also want to say that the workshop that Giovanna just did on PV was absolutely amazing, and I'm sort of very honoured to be invited on this panel. So thank you very much. My sort of journey has been that I'm an architect, and I've got about 15 years of experience in the retrofit of existing buildings, and that's my passion. I love buildings. I love insulation, actually. So I think we should love insulation as much as we love clothes. We're sort of wrapping our buildings, we're keeping our buildings warm, keeping us warm in our buildings. I think we should pay it the same attention. My journey is that I then lovingly, passionately, over 7 years, retrofitted a house in Lewisham in Honor Oak. It's a mid-terrace 1970s house. And right now I'm using 3,600 kilowatt hours and making, with solar PV on the roof, 4,000 kilowatt hours, and have an air source heat pump. And I've done all the right things. But it's obviously a lot of work, and it's taken a long time and lots of love and passion. The key here is that it's not enough to just be doing individual one-off projects for me. I wanted to have a bigger impact. And my son, who at the time was in year 3, was the link. It was him that helped me understand the power of connecting with primary schools, and from primary schools out into the community. And when I was doing work on the house, we put some cork insulation in, for example, or we did a thermographic survey, or we did an air tightness test. He did these lovely A3 posters, and he just sort of, in sort of wonky writing and funny arrows and funny little diagrams, just sort of described what it was that we were doing. And he then took them to his class, and he presented them to his colleagues, and his teacher let him put them up in the corner of the classroom. And there's a little sort of retrofit corner. This kid with his mad dad doing sort of crazy retrofit stuff. But actually, everybody's really, give a thermal camera to children. They absolutely love it. They discover all sorts of new things. And we're now sort of 22 people in Raft, and we run workshops in schools. We support schools to decarbonize and understand what measures they can take in the short, medium, and long term. But just looking at that radiator there, if Michelle, for example, was running a workshop with children right now, we would say, where is the heat coming from? Where's the heat coming from? So the children would look around the room. They might find some hot pipes. They might find the radiator. But then we can say, right, tell you what, let's go and find out where's that heat coming from. So using a thermal camera, using our hands, we can actually do a narrative route through the building, through cupboards, through corridors, and we'll make our way back to the boiler room. And when we get to that boiler room, we can then have a discussion about how is that heat being produced? And, it's gas being burnt. And then we can help them make the link between gas burning, the distribution of gas underneath London, and then connecting back into sort of fossil fuel extraction. So it really helps them link sort of how do you keep your space in your classroom or your home warm, and then how does that connect to sort of fossil fuel extraction and the climate emergency more widely. So we're sort of using our knowledge and passion of buildings to try and impart that knowledge to children. Yeah, I think some. I don't know what everybody's agendas are here today, but I think there's a sort of raging debate at the moment is about how much should you insulate your home before you install an air source heat pump. I think it's a sort of really big topic, and I just sort of want to point out that there's been shifts generally in this sort of topic, and I am actually, this is not a plug, but I am actually writing a book on retrofit at the moment for the Royal Institute of British Architects. It's going to be published next October. And we'll be providing, I heard Giovanna talk about archetypes earlier on, we'll be providing lots of different archetypes of different types of homes, so you can sort of see your home, look at all the sort of problems that your home might have, and then look at all the possible solutions your home might have. But we definitely want to address this question of, and it's quite technical, but it's not too complex. It's like, should we install an air source heat pump now? Should we be a passive house retrofit, or should we put a bit in? And I think what we've understood from working with schools and sort of working in the whole sort of school sector is that there's very low investment. Buildings are very poorly maintained. And I would just say, look, number one is please value maintenance of your building, and please look after your building as best as possible. Try and get it retrofit ready, and don't contemplate doing air source heat pumps or insulation or anything until you've done that. But then think about some effective, cost-effective, quick wins. Sometimes, if you have single glazing, it's not a quick win. It's expensive, but windows have an enormous amount of heat loss, single glazing. So it's sort of really good to do that. But then there are a few measures, such as air tightness, but I never say air tightness without saying ventilation. So air tightness plus ventilation, and then loft insulation. And I think you're in a pretty good space if you can look at a sort of a simple package of sort of PV windows, bit of air tightness ventilation, and a bit of loft insulation, any targeted insulation, then put an air source heat pump, and then maybe over time you consider adding more insulation. So I just want to make that point because I think it's probably quite helpful steer for people to sort of know, how far to go.
Amazing. Yeah. So I think there's something about also the quality of how we do this together, because schools are a really good example of that, and there's so much knowledge that can be transmitted through those encounters with schools, and how that knowledge kind of ripples out. But I think there's some really interesting examples across the UK of how communities, streets, or local neighborhoods have come together and have mutually supported one another to not only understand how to do retrofit, like everything that you just spoke about, Harry, but also how they want to do retrofit, what they want their community to look like. And there's been some really exciting examples of how community have taken charge, especially within the granting processes of that. But it's more setting that context of what do we actually want? Like, this retrofit is one part of a larger puzzle. And Madeleine has a breadth of knowledge about what different groups are doing up and down the UK. And so the question is, how have they done it?
Yeah, well, different ways. But I mean, I guess just to start, the sort of term place-based retrofit, place-based approaches, sort of a buzzword these days. I think it's really about sort of recognizing that, we can't do this in isolation, as atomized individuals, and we also can't sort of do it only through, big national grant schemes. I mean, they're really important. They provide the funding, but you need a local organization or sort of groups of people coming together. Creating sort of an organization that people trust, and that can support people through the retrofit process to educate people about retrofit, which is what you guys are doing and other groups around the country are doing. Because as you say, retrofit is really complex, and it's when you look at it sort of in terms of what we're all trying to do nationally, it's someone else used the term infrastructure. I mean, it's a massive infrastructure project, and but it's one that deals with the thing that is most personal to us, it's our homes, and you need that local, that local support and the ability to sort of build trust in that process and see it through. So the way that I see it, there's sort of two main ways that groups have gone about that. And one is to sort of position, it could be communities coming together, it could be a community energy organization sort of taking on the Retrofit Challenge, engaging the community, and trying to be either a trusted source of advice for people, to get started with the retrofit process, or even, groups like Selce actually guiding people through the whole process and trying to be a partner to individual households in that. The other sort of approach, which is, the first approach is great, but, taking it a step further, trying to actually bring whole streets or neighborhoods of homes together to retrofit collectively, and trying to create sort of economies of scale and potentially find like new opportunities for funding that wouldn't exist for individual households. Yeah. Squeaky. Just a couple sort of examples of each category. So, on the second, and I think this is really the direction that we need to be moving in. So there are a couple examples of whole street retrofit around the country that have been really interesting, and sort of just to highlight one that's sort of currently in process. So Carbon Co-op in Manchester, I guess you describe them as a community energy group. But they are working on a whole street retrofit scheme in the Levensholm area. And so what they realized, early on is that you could both, sort of achieve these economies of scale and actually a better design, better outcomes in terms of energy performance for the houses if you did the whole street, but also that each household would have, different needs, different expectations. Even with a sort of terrace street, the interiors would look different. There would be extensions. Not every house is the same. So basically, they approached that project by creating sort of an overarching design framework, and then sort of really consulting with each individual household to sort of create like a flexible specification within that framework. And that was really made possible by the fact that they brought in their contractor from the very start of the project to sort of co-design the process. So rather than, this is probably what a council would have to do if they were to embark on a similar project, they would have to do a sort of traditional lowest cost tendering process where you bring the contractor in at the very end. So they didn't do that. They brought their contractor B4 Box in sort of from the very start and co-designed the scheme with the contractor and with residents. So they were able to sort of achieve, kind of that whole street approach, that economy of scale while still being able to tailor it to the households. The other really interesting thing about that scheme is that they were able to blend several different funding sources. So there were household contributions from some households, but it was mainly funded through grants where households qualified for Eco4 or other grants. But also they sort of on a chance discovered this ability that Manchester City Council had and other councils have to offer zero interest loans for private home improvements. It's called a group works loan. And it's only needs to be fully repaid when ownership of the property changes. So, they were able to get, I think, up to £35,000 loan for each home in the scheme, which is, really enables quite like a comprehensive retrofit approach. And yeah, again, they sort of found out about this ability for the council to lend at a 0% interest rate because someone in the council with institutional memory of the sort of 90s when the council used to do this on a regular basis said, well, this mechanism is sitting right here. Why don't we apply it to retrofit? And so not every council is in a sort of position to do that, but there has been interest from others in exploring that model. So I think that could be something that, as groups of people come together and start thinking about whole street retrofit or even, small clusters of houses, just understanding that sort of thing exists, or maybe other sort of finance opportunities like it, I think is really worth exploring. Just gonna take some more. So the other example that I just wanted to highlight, and this is probably quite well known to a few people in here, but Retrofit Balsall Heath, which is at this point quite a significant scheme in Birmingham in the Balsall Heath ward, and what's really unique about their approach is that they've sort of taken it. Their approach has been to really engage their whole community via community organizations. So they've been working really closely with local Islamic groups and other organizations, and sort of bringing everyone into designing the project, from start to finish. And it's not a whole street scheme as far as I know. It's individual houses, but it's concentrated in a specific area. And they've been able to retrofit 650 homes, I think, so far. And again, the sort of funding and finance bit of that, I think, is really interesting. So they were able to get funding from Birmingham Council to help enable a lot of the work on the schemes, I think about up to £10,000 per home. And they were able to lobby to get income criteria removed from the sort of eligibility requirements for that funding, which I think is really, really important because the national grant schemes are, the sort of income limits and eligibility requirements can be quite restrictive. And when you're trying to do any sort of retrofit on an area basis, or a whole street or groups of properties, obviously everyone is in different circumstances, and having such strict criteria really limits people's ability to come together and work collectively on this. So the fact that Retrofit Balsall Heath was able to do that, I think really shows how effective that approach can be, and maybe the one that we need to be moving in nationally or locally with the councils that community groups are working with. So I'll wrap it up there, but just a few really exciting examples of new things that are happening in place-based retrofit.
Thank you. I think while Retrofit Balsall Heath project was happening, I was working here supporting LAD schemes, and I remember, which is a local authority, it's the equivalent grant that was being delivered here. And I remember hearing about what the folks did is they went back to Birmingham Council and said, this isn't good enough. We would like to do this, but the way you have it isn't going to work. And they just happened to have somebody who was in the right position with the council who had open ears and said, okay, how will it work? And that's why it's been so successful, is because it's been a dialogue, and that they were involved in designing redesigning that process, which is very exciting. And it takes like chutzpah and gumption and like a whole bunch of tenacity to make that happen. But part of what we wanted from today was to also share, that it isn't necessarily always a top-down one-way thing. We can also take control of how we're going to retrofit our communities together. So thank you so much for everything you've contributed. Do you have something to say, Nadia?
So I just wanted to pick up on that point that Madeleine made, and also Harry talked about it in a little way earlier. I think at the core, this is about making retrofit as easy as possible for people to do. Madeleine talked about different financing solutions and options. She talked about getting contractors involved from the start. I mean, has anyone here tried to get quotes from an installer to install a retrofit measure in their house? Anyone tried to get a quote for a heat pump? Or yeah? A few of you. How has that gone? Has it been super easy finding these companies? Has it been a bit tough? Got some raised eyebrows here. Yeah. Three contractors all said completely different things. So it's confusing. You did really well to get 3 quotes, actually. A lot of people struggle to get one. And Harry mentioned earlier, insulation should be just as interesting and exciting and something that people want to get as clothes are. And I think what we need to remember is that community groups and community energy groups at their core are non-profits. And the benefit of non-profits playing a role in this space, and also perhaps in some ways a drawback of non-profits playing a role in this space, is that they do everything by the community and for the community. So there's a lot of, the aim in the end is to support people to do what they want to do the most. Now, the for-profit sector is essentially the opposite of that. It's to encourage people to do things that make them money, that make them the most money. And I think that's what we've seen in the fashion industry. We've seen brands really do a lot of data analysis, a lot of trying to understand what makes people buy more clothes, what makes people buy fast fashion and want to have a new outfit every 2-3 weeks. And they've also figured out really well, and kudos to the for-profit and to the commercial industry, how to make it so easy for people to buy and so easy for people to consume. You look at Amazon, they've done a lot of research into how people go across Amazon's website, how to make them purchase with one click only and it be at their house the next day. And they've worked on making it really, really easy for people to consume and consume and consume. Now, what we need to do as the community is actually learn from the commercial sector and make it as easy as possible for people to retrofit and move away from the things that they don't necessarily want, but they have that impulse to buy because they've seen all this marketing, and actually facilitate people doing things that they do want much more easily. So Madeleine talked about low-cost financing options run by councils. Community energy groups very much do the same thing. They bring local people together to invest in a community organization and then deliver a low-cost financing option for community buildings that don't necessarily have, the 150,000 saved up that they need for solar panels. Yeah, but community energy groups can offer that because local people in the area want to do something good with their money, and they can offer interest rates as low as 4-5% on that. So it's really a win-win situation, and I think that's what we need to see more of. Just anything that the community can do to make retrofit easier, be that looking at the financing options, looking at getting more installers and sharing knowledge of installers and who's trusted. And also, like Flavia mentioned earlier, working to raise the profile of community-led retrofit amongst government and amongst leaders. So that means talking to our councillors about how important retrofit is to us, talking to other people in leadership about, actually, this is a social issue. This is a really important thing for us. How can we make sure that it's made easier for everyone to do it? Maybe as easy as getting a retrofit in one click, one day.
Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to open it up to the floor. Yeah.
Madeleine, you referred to the very innovative financing through Birmingham, that's right, of, was it 0%? Or was it Manchester? 0% loan to be repaid on sale of the property. Is that
Fully repaid, yeah.
fully repaid?
Yeah.
So my question is, do we know if Lewisham or Greenwich are considering that? Because that sounds awesome. And if not, what could we do as a community to encourage that? Because seriously, financing is not relevant, right? This is about investment in the future. But one of the places that we do like to spend money on is our homes. We need them up. So that's my question.
So yeah, the group works loan, I believe it is something that councils generally have the ability to offer. It's sort of fallen out of fashion. It was something that councils used to lend for private home improvements, particularly to remedy like properties that were unfit for human habitation, and this happened sort of in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And some councils still do it. It's just quite variable now. I know that with Manchester and Carbon Co-op, the council was quite willing to do this because, you know, it wasn't a huge investment in sort of their terms, but also I think that the accounting of it, it actually sits as an asset on their balance sheet, the 0% loan. And so, you know, the residents are repaying that loan over time, but it only needs to be fully repaid on sort of change of ownership. So it's a very long-term.
Still some weekly, monthly repayment.
Yeah.
It's not.
I think. Oh,
Just to respond to your question, does this happen in Greenwich or Lewisham or anywhere locally? No. Unless you are vulnerable, you're on a very low income, you can get a loan for home improvements. Otherwise, no, it doesn't. Here's where Greenwich Lewisham residents, could I ask for your help? I think they might do it with a bit of a push. So maybe we could think about a bit of a campaign. We've asked, as Selce, they're not taking the bait. But maybe with all of your help. That's great.
To say that the Lewisham's just the new retrofit strategy they've just published has got some vague words about looking at what other boroughs are doing and whether it might be possible to do something along these lines. So again, I think that might be the time to be contacting your councillors and saying this is a real important priority, and asking what they're planning to do.
That's really exciting. And again, I think maybe you know, if you are going to have those conversations with the council, maybe highlighting that it does sort of technically sit as an asset on the balance sheet. Probably an important. Anyone?
And just to add to that, it sounds really exciting. I think presenting a project that has legs and has been thought through a little bit, rather than just sort of saying, can we have this? And there's no sort of clarity around that. So I don't know if people were going to be coming together with a coherent, this is where we might start, and it's not too big, but sort of a certain size, then they might be willing to consider it. So yeah.
Yeah, Tamsin, you raised your hand there, 'cause it's quite interesting. There's the Greener Greenwich Community Network that we could use to try to approach the council. Is that what you were wanting to say?
that's a very good point. And yes, people want to come tell us things that they wanted to do. We have the ability to get lots of other people to come and do sign petitions or ask questions at full council, so we can help you put a bit of pressure on. I suspect that might be slightly more of an open door in Lewisham than it is Greenwich, but very happy to give it a go. What I was actually going to say was there is also an organisation called Climate Emergency UK who produce scorecards of how councils are doing on various things, and within their website you can find evidence of moves and campaigns that other councils have run. I suspect there would be evidence around this sort of thing in there, so it's well worth having a look at their website if you want to go to a councillor or to your whole council and say, this is another council that has done this, look how successful it was, here you go.
So I think we have time for one last question, and then we'll take a little break, and then we'll go into the workshop. So
Yeah, thank you. I live on an estate that's facing demolition, but obviously the corner's turning on that. And so what do you do with housing stock that hasn't been invested in and possibly left to its own devices in 20 years, so it's even worse than other estates? So I guess my question is, it would really be great to get to work together with someone to get information together. There's lots of information out there floating. I think even when you talk about school kids and you kind of the visualization of if your housing, if you're in a tower block, this is how much. Sure. According to carbon, which is not today's conversation, this is how much you would save insulated kind of thing. So there's that point, because I think there's lots of ways to kind of maybe try and pin down information and visualize it. And the other point is I really liked that you raised this idea of retrofit ready. I thought that's because many estates are depopulated because they were facing demolition. Potentially there's no money now to do it. So it might be economic reason, but you've got all these empty homes that, being empty is an opportunity for retrofit, but it does mean their condition is much poorer, but then they will rehouse a lot more people. And also, as I also mentioned earlier on housing estates, you've got potential workforce You know, you do, that's where young families potentially are, or people who are builders and helping to retrain. So there's lots of potential for where does social housing fit in to this world called sphere. But I like this idea of retrofit rental, as particularly, it's an interesting concept. So you don't need to go straight from like 0 to retrofitting. It's just what are the steps? You know, you can't, because that's the thing, many people live in rundown houses, and someone mentioned to me, you can't retrofit a house that isn't repaired anyway. It's like, we assume people understand your house is going to be repaired, but they're like, what's the point of insulating if my roof is still leaking? You know, and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. So, I think there's like this session has been very much about like thinking big and blowing our brains into wonderful places of what could be possible, of how we, and just fodder for how we can come together. If there is anything that you have heard or ideas that come to you that you'd really like to take forward, or you feel that there's a need, please do either email us if you'd like us to be involved in any way. You know, we can capacity build as much as we can. We would love to just, and any door that's open, essentially, we're happy to come on through to support the change. And then also within the feedback forms, if there's anything in particular you'd like us to follow up with you directly, or you have certain things that you'd like to have sent to you that has come up in this, please do just stick it in there, and then we can follow up through that. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.